anyway, we can get started. So real quick agenda, just who is Fuse, who am I? We'll go over, using Centrify. If you don't know what it is, we'll kind of go over some of the custom grains that we've created and then how to add this into Jinja maps. So that way we can do things once and never do them again. That's usually my prime goal. Had a really cool video. It was like a whole marketing thing for recruiting. Unfortunately, we couldn't get the audio to work, so there's not any sense in watching it. Sorry. But who is Fuse? We were established probably about 2013, 2014. There was a sales company called ClearShark. We merged with a company called CRG. Everybody from the support and services ended up moving to this company called Fuse. All the sales stayed with ClearShark. I was one of the lucky ones. I had just started with ClearShark about 3 months before I heard that I was no longer working for ClearShark and that I was going to be working for Fuse. So it was very interesting. But here's some of the partners we work with between Fuse and Fuse Solutions. Fuse Solutions is kind of a new thing that they've spun up within the past year. We acquired Zyedge back in 2017. Zyedge is a lot of pre-sales, post-sales, a lot of commercial support. They're based out of Virginia. So really Fuse Solutions is that company now. We do a lot of work with Elastic, Red Hat, of course, SaltStack. We do a lot of storage, a lot of provisioning, VMware, that kind of thing. So who am I? So I've actually been doing this for about 20 years. I started back in 1999. I got my first job as a high school work study with the Department of Defense. Really, it was just a job for me, and I really didn't take it seriously. In 2000, I joined the Air National Guard. My parents, everybody in my family's been in the military, so that was the next step for me. Lo and behold, I found that I really liked doing IT work for the DoD, so I kind of stuck with it and did the Guard work on the side. The military pretty much gave me an opportunity to learn a lot of IT stuff and to send me through training. So that was fun, but I only did 6 years. I became a contractor shortly after, and I've just been a contractor since probably about 2001, 2002. And I've done everything from desktop support to storage, virtualization. Right now, one of my big things is just automation. Like I want to do things one time. I want to learn it one time. I want to push it out there, and I never want to see that code ever again unless it breaks. And that's one of the things that we're kind of looking at. Again, like I said, I got my certification for SaltStack at the conference last year. I've got my RHCSA. I've taken a ton of classes. And again, I'm always looking for new ways to be lazy. My bosses are both sitting right here. I will openly tell you that I will spend way too long on a problem because I know I'm going to see it again. And that's what we encountered here with coming up with the solution that we ran into. So just like a quick show of hands, does everybody know what Centrify is and what it does? So if you have a Linux desktop, Linux server, and your backend infrastructure is Active Directory, if you have Microsoft somewhere in there, anytime you have a Windows desktop out there, Windows desktops are going to want to talk to Active Directory. That's really the only way you can get LDAP done. What Centrify does is it creates a way to deploy the KRB file and all the information that you need, so that way that Linux host can talk to Active Directory. So it does a lot of this manual labor for you. On the project that I'm on now, that's one of the things that we ran into was we had junior Linux admins that are running around trying to copy KRB files from multiple servers and push them out and think that it was going to work. And they weren't updating it. They didn't know what was in there. So we needed to come up with a better way. Lucky for us, I'm still on contract with the government, so we have site licenses for a ton of things. Centrify just so happens to be one of them. So we pull in Centrify and we kind of leverage that. And we really let Centrify do its thing. It's super easy to deploy, super easy to configure. It's an 80 join, and you're pretty much there. Let's see here. So one of the other benefits that we got from it was being able to create roles, computer roles. We deal with a lot of vendors, from McAfee to Splunk. We have a whole gamut on my contract. So one of the things that we wanted to do, everybody asks for root, we're going to go ahead and give you root. but you can only have root on your boxes. You break it, you bought it, we'll back it up, we'll do our due diligence, but at the end of the day, that's your box. So what we did was we set up authorizations. It helps, if you know the sudoers file, sudoers can be a complete pain. So instead of me managing the sudoers file in Salt to deploy it through SSSD, it's just a lot easier to put these authorizations in and let Centrify have this conversation about it. So that's pretty much what we did. Let's see here. So some prerequisites to make all this fun stuff work. Any good Windows engineer, Windows admin is going to have sites and services set up, especially when you're distributed. If you have multiple data centers across the United States, across the globe, like we do, one of the things you don't want to do is have your Active Directory or your Windows boxes, your Linux boxes talking to a domain controller that's halfway around the world. The latency is too much. You're going to run into some time sync issues. You're going to be told that you're not allowed to log in, and it's really an issue. So if you set up your sites and services correctly, you can point it to the local domain controllers, so you're talking to local DCs instead of spinning halfway around the world. So then the other thing we're going to talk about is our custom grain that I say we wrote it. It's a lot of code recycling. It's a lot of understanding other people's code, understanding my output that I was getting, and really what we were going to do with it, and the good things that Centrify is able to give me and how I can leverage that. So this is, if anybody's been in Microsoft Sites and Services, this is basically what it looks like. I stole this picture off the internet, so this is not real life. But Sites and Services is basically set up through Microsoft. You open up the MMC, you add in the snap-in for Sites and Services, and you configure your subnets. If I'm in this IP space, I'm in Memphis, and if I'm in this other IP space, I'm going to be in Nashville. If I have other IP space, like my servers, they're going to be in Texas, they're going to be in Georgia, they're going to be in Hawaii. We have them all over the place. This was already set up for me by the time I got on my contract, so I didn't have to worry about it. I had a really good Windows engineer that knew that we were going to look for stuff like this. So that was actually real beneficial. So I have my Linux box. I have Centrify. I join my Linux box to my domain controller. Everything is happy. Now I want to try and create custom grains. This is the part where you just have to know what you want to capture and what you want to get. So if I log into one of my Linux boxes and I type the AD info command, it's one of the things that's built in with Centrify. It's going to tell me the local host name. It's going to tell me what it was joined to in Active Directory. It's going to tell me a pre-Windows 2000 name. They still support it. I guess people are still running it. So sometimes you can't have more than 15 characters. It is what it is. It's also going to tell you your current domain controller, which is kind of beneficial. But it's not something that we really needed to key in here. What we wanted to key in is the preferred site. So back on the other page here where we have Microsoft Sites and Services, you'll see Memphis and Nashville. That's really the information that it's exposing, is right here where it says preferred site, it's going to say Memphis, Nashville, Texas, whatever data you call that subnet, it's going to put it right in there. And then the other thing it has is a Centrify zone. If you deal in giant networks, if you have a ton of stuff all over the world and you have different administrators that are managing your domain, you're probably going to have multiple zones. It's just part of the hierarchy of Active Directory. You create a forest. Underneath that forest, you have different subdomains. This kind of follows that same path. So like I said, I recycle to include my code. And that's what I did here was I took a pre-existing Centrify grain that somebody created, and I really modified it to make it do what I wanted it to do. So let me click over real quick, and we'll take a look at, oh, good. All right, is that viewable for everybody? Make it a lot bigger. How's that look? So I also want to apologize. I don't have a live demo. What I did was because we were on contract, a lot of that stuff that we built belongs to and on the government system. But what I did was I wrote as much as I could to make sure that we can at least show you guys what we're doing and how we're running it. So just real quick, has anybody created a custom grain before? Nod your head, shake your head. Yeah, a couple people. Okay, perfect. So some of this might look a little familiar to you guys. So the couple ways to create a custom grain. You can put things into on your minion. You can put things into Etsy Salt grains. That's terrible to manage. I already know information off of that. I want to create that automation piece as much as I can. I don't want to sit there and try and write logic over and over again when a new subnet comes in. My Windows engineer is going to do that for me. I don't need to repeat everything that he's doing when a new site is stood up. But if you put things into serve salt and underscore grains, I just have a custom grains Python. Again, I copy things over, so if there's like some misspelling, some syntax issues, that's on me. I fat fingered it. But what we're doing here is, like I said, if we run that AD-info command and we get that output, I want to be able to use that. I want it in a grain. When you have things in a pillar are your secrets. Pillars are things that you're going to run once the salt state is run. It's going to compile. It's going to figure out where it needs to be. A grain is something more known about that host, something that's not going to change. I'm not going to pick up a server and put it in a complete different data center, especially when I have hardware. The server is not going to magically disconnect from Texas and show up in Hawaii the next day. This thing's going to be here, and I need it there. If it's down, then it's an issue. If it's reporting to another domain controller, that may also be an issue. We've ran into that a couple of times. So like I said, know your output. So if I run this AD-info command on a box that has been centrified, this version will tell me what version of Centrify I'm running. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and set a default grain called isInstalled_false. But if this returns any value, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and set it to true. That way I know that Centrify is installed on this box. Could I do this with some sort of package manage? Absolutely. The only problem with that is I don't always need Centrify installed on some of these vendor appliances. Sometimes they come in and it's a straight up appliance and they don't want us as the O&M team touching it at all. So we tell them they're on their own, go manage it, not my problem. So the other thing I'm going to pull out here is this AD-info-S. So back on that sites and services page, when I said you have to know your output, this AD-info-S will give me that preferred site, that data center location. If I pull that out, I can set the data center so that way we know exactly where it is. This thing will run one time and we'll be good. Obviously, if nothing shows up, I don't really want it to error out. So by default, I set it to no DC. That way I know, hey, this thing has Centrify installed, hasn't been joined to a domain controller. We need to go back and either talk to the security team, talk to the person who built it, or talk to the team that needs it and see if this thing really needs to be on the domain. Again, AD-info-Z, the part of the output I wanted. I want to know if I'm in a giant forest, what subdomain am I calling out to? Am I in the main hierarchy? Am I in something lower? I kind of want to be able to have that flexibility. In reality, this Centrify zone doesn't get used a whole lot where we're at now, but we wanted to have it available to us. That way, if we need to expose that somewhere else, or if somebody tells us we need to stand up some other forest in some other domain controller somewhere, I know I don't have to go modify any of this. It already exists. And lastly, and this is the part that looks really cool. I wish I had a live demo for you guys. Unfortunately, I don't. But this DZ-info command is another thing that comes with Centrify. And I know this sounds like a Centrify sales pitch, but it's really not. I was talking to somebody at breakfast today, and we were kind of going back and forth, and I was explaining to him, what the talk was about and everything like that. And he was like, oh, we kind of do that with SSSD. Absolutely can. There is nothing stopping you from trying to take this methodology, know your output, and be able to transform exactly what we did into SSSD commands. I'd say it's pretty easy, but again, you just have to know your output. You have to know your commands and where you can get this from. So in the DZ-info command, there's a -C option, which will tell me what my computer roles are. So if you remember earlier in the talk, I said we deal with all these vendors. They want root access on all these boxes. McAfee wants root, Splunk wants root, the DevOps team wants root, security wants root on some of the boxes. So since I've already leveraged that authorization and I'm not managing the sudoers file, I can pull out and see what group these computers are put into in Active Directory. The help desk adds these computers to groups when people say they need root access. Easy enough. Let me just leverage that. So that way, when we go through and we start coming up with some of these solutions, I know that if I run this salt call grains.item and I do sent roles, it defaults to infrastructure. It's an infra box. It's one of mine. But if this thing comes out and says Splunk, if this thing comes out and says McAfee or anything like that, DevOps, we need to go talk to those guys. I can help you turn it on, but if something on there is broke, that's not really us to troubleshoot. So let's go back to, so of course, once you have your grain and it's deployed out there and you have it in the underscore grains, custom grain, whatever you call it, you have to make sure you do a salt util refresh grains. That way it gets deployed to all your salt minions. It gets viewed, it's easy to call, but now I can start leveraging it. And this is where my cool part comes in at. So is everybody familiar with Jinja maps? Has anybody used them before? How was the documentation on there? I see a lot of head shaking yes for I've used them and a lot of head shaking no, saying there is little documentation. And I agree. It was hard. We stumbled through it. It took us a little bit longer than we probably want to admit, but it took us a while to figure out how to create this Jinja map. So for those of you who don't know what a Jinja map is, it's a glorified lookup table. When I first started doing salt, we wanted to take everything we possibly could. I'll throw out a little war story right now. When I first started working for Fuse and I was on contract, one of the things that we had was a ton of hardware boxes. One of the worst things ever. The boxes they didn't have a mirror drive because it was commodity boxes to this application team. They really did not care. If the box fell off, they were good. Spin it up, restore it, run this script. It'll be back up in business. So what we found was when I'm getting a call at 2 o'clock in the morning to come in and switch out a hard drive, and then I have to re-kick the box. Then I have to call in one of the application developers. They run some magical script on the box, and then it's back up and running. So we're talking this could take anywhere from 4 to 6 hours from the time the box fails until the time the box is back in the commission. So what we did was we went back and we started working with that ops team, and we took their script and we said, show it to us. We want to know exactly what this is doing. And at the end of the day, it was a shell script. And all this bash script is doing is it's calling out certain things, it's installing certain packages, it's installing certain config files, it's making sure things are added to a cluster. This is the perfect thing that Salt can do. Like, we're kind of new at this, but let us figure it out. So we took their script and we made them all native Salt calls. Some of this was involved in it. So when we were writing the custom grain, some of this was in mind. If I have a box that's out in Tennessee, I don't want that box to be rebuilt and join a cluster that's sitting in Georgia. That's the exact opposite of what I want, right? I want all my Tennessee boxes to be in a Tennessee cluster. I want all my Georgia boxes to be in a Georgia cluster. So that's kind of what got us started. What we quickly ran into was there was a lot of for loops. There was a lot of if then, if then, if then. And by the time I get to my 13th, 14th site, that's the slowest one to compile. That one takes forever. And we used to get some of the dev guys to be yelling at us, why does this one take forever to run? And we just figured out like this for loop thing isn't working. So what we did was we figured out Jinja maps. So now that I have my Jinja map and I know what one is, I'm going to go ahead and create one. And I'm going to create one based off of I'm going to create one based off of my data center that I created. So here, I have a couple notes in here. So this is one of the fancier salt states that we have. It's for building kickstart boxes out at each site that we have because nothing's worse than dragging an ISO across the WAN trying to build a box. It's terribly slow. So what we do is we just push it out from the main Salt master to the Kickstart server one time, and then we configure it all from this state. So here you can see we set kick info and we filter by the grain. So here I have like Maryland, Virginia, Georgia, Florida. I just put in a whole bunch of states, whole bunch of subnets, whole bunch of good information. And I'm going to base that off of this grain called data center. So it's going to query this data center grain. It's going to filter them and it's going to figure out whether or not it's in Utah based off of that custom grain we created. Then I'm going to go ahead and merge it into a pillar and I'm going to call it kick info. So now all this stuff is compiled. All this stuff, it knows exactly where it's at. So here I have Maryland. I have my subnet. I have my kick. I have my DNS server information, and I have my next server. So how do we use this? That was a good question, Tommy. I appreciate that. So how do I use this? So at the very top of my config files or my state files, I can go ahead and just say, hey, from this location, here's my Kickstart path. Here's where my Jinja map lives. And I'm going to go ahead and import this kick info with context. Sweet. So now how do I use it? All that's available to me. It's exposed in this config file. So when this gets dropped down, you can see my domain option in my DHCP config. It has kickinfo.dns. It's already compiled everything for me. I don't have to write anything. It's already there. Worst case, I have to stand up a new line in my Jinja map, and I have to put those 6 bits of information in there, which is a lot easier than going through and trying to rewrite custom grains, trying to go through and try and do some sort of for loop or try and pull out the IP address. We had a real problem with standardization. So when my Active Directory servers, when my DHCP server, when my DNS servers at sites were different, sometimes I would run out to a site, it would be .2 and 3. Sometimes I would run out to a site and it would be .1 and 2. Sometimes I'd run out to a site and somebody would jump automatically to the hundreds. Just, it was efficient, it was whatever they did. We were able to leverage this, and that way we could push out kickstarts, not affect mission. We can make sure that we were building boxes as we stood up and kind of standardize some of these boxes. And that's a big thing for the government too. Being able to standardize anything is big in the government. That way, when you go through your SSP or your system security plan, you show them that you know what you're doing. Security team needs to be able to feel comfortable. And this is what we're doing, is we're making them feel comfortable on how we have these things set up and configured. So again, I can call out any one of these in the subnet. Again, I have notes so that way I know that anything is going to end with just a numerical value, hence my kick info subnet. We really didn't know where to put the period. We thought the period was more valuable in the Jinja map than it is in the config file, because I'm not really going to look at the config file. It's already configured unless I'm going to change my domain name or something like that. So where else can I use this? Any state. So in my kickstarts, actually let's go back and look at the init file. So here's my kickstart state. We're just going to do basic things, install HTTPD, set some config files, make sure everything's up and running. We're going to go ahead and open up the firewall so that way we don't run into any issues with something local talking to the local kickstart server. We found out the hard way that prune services is always on. So anytime you mess with a firewall, if you do any config changes, set to prune services to false. Otherwise, you're going to lose anything that you don't configure. So as you can see here, I'm only calling out DHCP, HTTP, and TFTP. So when I ran my salt state and then I can't SSH back into it, there's a problem. Lucky for me, Salt doesn't need SSH, so that way I could just figure out what the problem was, run a Salt call, turn SSH back on, turn this Salt state off, and then I can go figure out that this magical setting really needs to be set to false. And then here is where I'm pulling my, my TFTP boot configs. If you file recurse, it'll actually traverse the whole entire thing. And if you have that Jinja map in the top or in your any of your config files, uber lazy points, it's going to grab everything for you. So if you have your TFTP boot and you want to modify one thing in that config file, same thing with the UEFI stuff. If anybody's booting hardware, modify it in some Pixie Linux default or in your grub config in your UEFI config. You put that one simple line at the top saying that I'm going to import kick info or import the Kickstart Jinja map. You're good. All that stuff shows up. And just for fun, this was really interesting to figure out. If you've kicked boxes before and you're setting opt to a certain size, or you're setting var to like 5 gig, and the ISO that you're pulling is more than 5 gig, var cache salt really eats up a lot of space when you're pulling that ISO. So as a fun workaround, we found a way to go ahead, and what we did was we sim linked the exact location that it was trying to put that ISO at. We sim linked it out to opt, where we have gigs and gigs of data that nobody ever uses, but they always ask for. And we go ahead and pull this DVD ISO. When it's done, it's kind of like that heist thing, right? When it's done and it's cached it and it's there and it's sitting in the right spot, the skip var or this keep source false, it removes it from opt. So that way I kind of create like a nice little way to not keep getting errors that I'm running out of space in var, when var at 5 gig for us is usually fine unless I'm pulling this ISO. And then we did the same thing with the RHEL workstation ISO just for fun. Sometimes people don't like Windows boxes. So that's just the way it worked. Like I said, in the UEFI and in the TFTP boot, in my grub config, I do the same exact thing. I can put this top line in any of these config files, and I have that pillar readily available for me based off of that grain. So that way I can set all this in my, that probably doesn't show up the way I want it to. But in my kick info kick, which is my actual Kickstart server, I'm pointing it right here in the config file. I don't have to go to every one and put in a host name and then manage this for 14 different sites or 14 different Kickstart servers. And the same thing is going to be for TFTP boot. Again, with that file recurse, it's going to pull all these config files down that we're going to need. Let's see here. So now, I have a whole bunch of empty files here, but it's just a proof of concept. It's just to let you guys know how we're running it. So back to the fact that we have multiple different vendors that we're dealing with and that we're working with. Splunk, McAfee, everybody else, right? DevOps, security. How do I apply certain configuration changes or certain security configurations based off of that grain, right? So in my top file, it's pretty much that easy, right? I created a cent role. I created a cent data center. I created a data center, a cent role, cent installed. So all I'm doing is I'm calling it out right here with a real easy, here's my standard config. Everybody's going to get that. Cool, no harm, no foul. I'm going to push out certain configuration changes. I'm going to make sure that my NTP servers are going to be configured. I can base that NTP server information off of my Kickstart Jinja map. But everything, that's my catch-all, right? So here in my Centrify role, all my infrastructure boxes. Well, I want all my infrastructure boxes. I know they're a Kickstart box. So awesome. I'm going to go ahead and put that in here based off of that cent role. Usually we have at the top of a lot of our state files, we have what we call a trapdoor. So we put a lot of like logic into the top of the state file. So that way, if the host name contains like kick, it's probably going to be a Kickstart state or Kickstart box. I want that host to go ahead and pull this Kickstart state because it matched off of an infrastructure box here. And in the state, it's going to say, hey, if grains.host in MD kick, TX kick, VA kick, UT kick, if it has any of those, it's going to go ahead and run this salt state. Splunk has some certain configs they like pushed out to all their boxes. They're a big fan of having us install their heavy forwarder on their boxes. It makes life a lot easier for them. They want a new box. They want a heavy forwarder on there. Cool. I mean, we can do it. You'll have root on it when it's done. You can do any of your configs that you want when it's finished, but at least the RPM will be there. So if you wanted to go ahead and switch user to the Splunk user on some of those boxes, go for it. Again, you break it, you bought it. We back it up as best we can. There's some assurances that we're going to help you bring that box back up if it's a basic issue, but if you just blow that box up, you have root. That's what security agreed on. And then again, the same thing for McAfee. So you'll notice that everything's in caps. It's just the way we wrote our custom grain. We kind of just wanted to standardize. I didn't want to run into a camel case issue, all lowercase, all uppercase. And if you've ever looked at the Centrify, or excuse me, the salt grains, there's a ton of them. I mean, you get lost in it sometimes just looking for whatever item you wanted. So we kind of just put ours all in caps. Kind of stands out a little bit more to us. Kind of makes a little more sense to us. So that's kind of the way we were running. Again, on the other project, yes. Oh, back to the config file? Sure. Yeah, infra by default in the custom grain is an O&M box. Splunk is their box, and that's based off of the Active Directory group that computer was put in. We have actually. Obviously infrastructure it's not named to anything. There has been a couple scenarios where there's like a DevOps box and there's a Splunk box. Maybe they're working together on something. We have run into it. I don't know if I copied over the part of the state. Let's see here. Custom config. Yeah, so it looks like right here we should be able to create, I believe this line right here is what we had to use. So that way, when we run this, there are, and I query out sent roles to figure out what roles it has. It will populate both that it's a DevOps box and a Splunk box. I'm pretty sure this is line 42 right here that we added to support that. Again, I didn't test any of this, so this is what I was typing up while looking at the customer network and trying to make sure that everything was as unclassified as possible. But yeah, like it's a perfect use case. We've run into it before where there's just a box that ends up in two domains or two administrative role rights. The problem that you will run into is if there's any configuration error, mismatches between those two. That will be an issue, and that'll be something that just needs to be ironed out between the teams to figure out which way do you want it, right? So they usually want like some sort of heavy forwarder or lightweight forwarder on boxes for the Splunk boxes. If McAfee or DevOps says, well, I also want to test out some cool things with Splunk heavy forwarder, and I want to set up this cool little neat trick or this nice little dashboard, is there something in there that would mess up their config files? That's something that they're just going to have to work out. A lot of times we do have some beacons and reactors, so that way it'll call out to chat to us. So that way it'll tell us like, hey, I couldn't run Salt on these boxes because there's some sort of conflict. But again, that's one of those things where like you have to know your commands, you have to know the scenarios that you're going to run into. But yeah, actually that's a very valid question. We ran into it, I think, probably 3 or 4 weeks into actually having this custom grain created. So yeah, I mean, I'm right at 34 minutes according to my timer, which puts me perfect because I should be able to get an Uber and make it to the airport in time. But if anybody has any questions, feel free to email me. I mean, I can hang out for a minute or two if anybody has any specific questions. Other than that, I mean, I appreciate you guys coming out.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.